All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our monthly interdisciplinary lecture series. This is a lecture series that we hold together with the Department of Neurosurgery. And we're really excited today. I'm particularly excited because we have a young man today who's going to be hopefully inspiring us, talking about his journey. He's a young man who did exceptionally well as an undergraduate at UCT. I think finished with his MBA PhD with cum laude, which is unbelievable. He has a special interest in mental health and psychiatry. And I've had a number of different chats with him about his project that he did at UCT, and I'm sure he'll be telling us a little bit about that this afternoon. And I think we are also very excited that there are registrars here that will hopefully be listening to your journey, Wakithi, and get inspired by your journey. I'm sure there will be hopefully be time for questions and to ask you about the route that you've chosen to take following the MBCHB, which I would imagine is a little bit unusual, but certainly quite exciting. So over to you, Dr. Mabaso. I'm really looking forward to listening to your talk.
Thank you so very much, Prof. Teliza. It's an honor to be here on this platform at your invitation to share my journey with the discipline of psychiatry at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Without further ado, I will start sharing my screen for my presentation. Right. So usually I have quite a soft voice, I must warn you all. And today, unfortunately, that is being compounded by recently having had COVID. Fortunately, I am on the mend and I trust I will be audible throughout. Very happy that this is my final day of isolation. But again, my major thanks and appreciation to all of you today for being here as I present my journey in mental health. I believe appropriately titled En Route, because I am very young and very much still on the journey. And hopefully lessons learned from past experiences and things to look forward to in the future will come across over the next 30 or so minutes that we will be speaking. Just to outline what we will go through, just to provide some structure and expectations about the time frame, I'll speak a little bit about my background and then move you all through 3 throwbacks in my schooling career, which I found really important in guiding me on this journey that I've been on. We'll then touch on research and how I've been involved in research, specifically research in the field of mental health and the various manifestations of that research thereafter. And then I will describe a little bit about my clinical exposure to mental health in the field of psychiatry and how that has shaped me. I'll also touch on failure. I believe it's important to recognize the value of failing on any endeavor, in any pursuit, and truly the lessons that one can gain from that. And then we'll look to the future and the exciting things that that holds. Many times when someone speaks on their journeys, they're often much grayer in the hair and longer in the tooth than I am. And they begin their stories from decades back when they cast their minds to perhaps an event that instigated them on the path they're currently on, or just something that inspired them to choose the field of the career that they're currently in. If I were to cast my mind's eye decades back, we'd be somewhere in the 1980s where I was not born. So I will just start my story really from the beginning. I'm an only child from Durban. my name, Wakithi, literally means, translated in isiZulu, our son, Umfana Wakithi. And that being said, I come from a very warm and loving, close-knit home and family, having grown up in a very, I'd say, warm and open environment. As we're all familiar, Durban is, and I'm sure those who are very familiar can recognize the iconic Umhlanga lighthouse in this frame, very close to where I spent most of my youth growing up. So we'll start from the earliest years, primary and preparatory school. There you can see me wearing glasses at Glen Ashley Junior Primary School, where I was from grades 1 to 3. And you'll notice I'm not wearing glasses right now or today. Grand prize for whoever at the end can figure out why that is. But you'll see in the middle photo there, I was very much keen and interested on school. I loved interacting and engaging with the other children. I loved playing games. I loved learning from the teachers and especially reading. I also really loved that I was exposed to schooling. Glen Ashley is a school in Durban North, proper true suburbs of Durban, where we had access to forming relationships and bonds with people from a variety of cultures, which was a huge plus for me and which I really enjoyed. I actually remember celebrating just a few weeks ago, 20 years of friendship with one of my friends who I made in grade 1 at Glen Ashley. And so the strength of those bonds and the variety of exposures to the different cultures and ethnicities in and around Durban, from Muslim culture to Indian culture, Black culture, and my own ethnicities being Zulu and Xhosa, as well as people from other neighboring African countries and the white cultures was really, really important in shaping me thereafter. You can see I have 2 stars on my head in that photo because one is never enough. But as you can see, I was also very happy with my gap to the smile. On the photo on the right, in prep school from grades 4 to 7, you can see there, just really honing back in on some of the principles that were really instilled young in me, is that we had what I imagine was a bring your mom to school day. And it was lovely to know that in my family, I was supported and considered, and my mom came to the Bring Your Mom to School Day, despite her busy, you can see she's dressed there in her nice professional way, to support me and to be present. And that is a really consistent theme that would feature on my journey throughout as we move forward. I'm considering the next phase, which was high school. I remember in grade 7 when we had to decide on high schools, I was quite adamant in going to a boarding school. I don't know why. And I just felt that I wanted to experience that kind of life. Obviously being very young, I think I was 12 years old and naive, I wasn't very aware of the barriers, especially the affordability of it all. Nevertheless, my parents, as supportive as they always were, got behind me and we started looking at applications and we started looking at various schools in the Midlands, specifically private boarding schools, because I felt that a lot of people from my primary school actually were going to some of the local high schools nearby, and there were only 2 people going to private schools. And I was like, why can't I go to a private school? I feel like I should be able to go to a private school and experience what is happening there. Again, as naively as I said it at the time, I was very fortunate to get the support of my parents in applying for many different scholarships and open days, and very, very fortunate to have been awarded academic scholarship to Kearsley College in Hillcrest, where I then started my high school career. You can see me pictured there in one of the photos on the left, in front of my first, I think, exposure really, truly to the basic beginnings of research, where we had to do a science expo project. And the project that we worked on was looking at the effects of temperature and climate on the growth of bacteria, specifically, I think it was Streptococcus pyogenes. And we took home 2nd runner-up for the biology prize. And that was quite a proud moment for me. And if I really look back, a fork in the road that would really set me on some of my deepest passions today. On the right-hand side, you can see me there with a bunch of boys on a rugby field, smiling, laughing happily. I think I'm mainly smiling because, as you will also notice, my pants are very clean and very white, which means I had managed to make another rugby game without getting dirty, which was my main goal. So yeah, I had a lot of very interesting and fun experiences. It was nice to have a balanced life at Kearsley. Sport was very much a part of the ethos as well as culture. And that instilled more values important to my development. Similarly important as well, if I reflect between primary school and high school, Kearsley was a much more homogenous environment. I think there were only 10 Black pupils in my grade, and majority white pupils. So adjusting to that and also seeing how one exists in those spaces at that age was also critically important for my development. As we know, South Africa is such a varied country with a lot of different influences. Moving on swiftly to university. In fact, I had initially wanted to do architecture. In grade 10, I did some work experience with an architect and found that it was incredibly mundane and boring. I swiftly changed my mind, and I must credit my parents having a role in really guiding and supporting me in truly whatever career decision I may have chosen at the time. I was interested in things like astrophysics, business science, PPE, including medicine. And having parents in the medical field was a huge factor that really helped support me in my direction. I never felt pressured, which I'm really lucky about. And so I found that I really made my own choice. And even in making that choice, found that I had so much support from them. I decided to go to what may be a controversial statement, but the best medical school in South Africa. I applied for the University of Cape Town. I wanted to live in a different city. Having been independent in high school, going to a boarding school, I wanted to push that independence even further and live away from my parents in a new environment. And so I settled on Cape Town and really enjoyed, as you can see there pictured, the beautiful scenery of the mountain, the green forests, and further in the background, the ocean. I enjoyed my time there, but it was also an important learning curve for me. As we're all aware, Cape Town is quite an oppressive environment. Still a lot of residual racism, and it was an important experience for me to go through as well in honing my character as I moved through different spaces and as I developed my person in this career. What was particularly interesting about medical school in Cape Town is that I got more exposure to research, and I got my first tastes of mental health and psychiatry through fourth year and sixth year psychiatry rotations. But markedly, what I can note was in second year, how we had to do a special study project and do like a literature review. And we worked on neonatal bacteremia in Somerset Hospital, one of the hospitals close by the waterfront, actually. And that project was so interesting, and I loved doing it. I loved working on it. It felt like I wasn't working at all. That we ended up going further than a literature review. We wrote a report and eventually ended up presenting that work at the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health's annual research day. That was a critical step early on in my career that showed me just the potential and opportunity for research and just how rewarding and stimulating it was. Later on in fourth year, we had a module, a public health module that exposed us to developing a research protocol, practicing how to submit documents to ethics, acquiring ethical approval, etc. And similarly, I just loved working on that. And by that stage, I mean, after 3 exposures from high school and then in second year, now in fourth year, I had realized that some sort of bug had bitten. Interestingly, I wasn't yet so set on mental health and psychiatry. I was considering other specialties for my potential career. But I think in sixth year, I really did hone in more and realize just how fascinating psychiatry as a discipline is and truly the impact that one can have within the discipline. And so I quite particularly enjoyed my final year psychiatry rotation at Lentahia Hospital. Moving on to the crux really of this journey and what has been a keystone in my development research. What I'm going to do in this section is speak about my exposure to research and conducting research through a study that we worked on and did between 5th and final year of medical school. I'll then speak about some of the presentations of that research and the findings, which I found very stimulating and important for my development and growth at the time. And then I will expand a little bit on the impact that that research has had on society at large, nationally and locally. So yeah, near the end of 4th year in 2017, a friend of mine, Dr. Stefan van der Walt, he's currently doing community service in Manguzi, north of KwaZulu-Natal, came to me with a question like, why are so many of us struggling with mental health issues, depression, anxiety? Everyone seems to be on meds. What's going on? And, you know, we then resolved to try to figure out, well, you know, if you have a question, you want to figure something out, it's best first describe the problem so you can approach the problem. And we endeavored to, set about on this task of trying to describe the burden, you know, of mental health issues amongst medical students, amongst our class. We suspected there were issues at large around South Africa. And so we really set upon this very extracurricular project on top of all the academic work that we had to do for our medical studies, but truly driven by the curiosity and inquisitive spirit to find and figure something out. And with the help of amazing supervisors in Dr. Eugene Davids and Professor Petrus de Vries at the University of Cape Town, we embarked with adequate support on this transformative experience, which unfurled itself over the next 2 years. We found that by the time we had reported findings and made a few important findings to share with the faculty at large, remembering that a large part of this research, even personally for me, was about advocacy and motivating a spirit of change within the Faculty of Health Sciences and the departments in which we worked towards being more mental health positive and wellness positive. What we did was then we put some of those findings into an infographic, which is pictured here. And we developed this infographic with the support of SADAG, an amazing group, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, just to outline some of our most important findings at the time. Markedly, you'll see there a big number, 473. It was quite a surprise to us at the time was that, in fact, we had managed to conduct what was then the largest study on depression and anxiety in medical students ever done in South Africa. There had previously been 2 studies I was aware of, the one in University of Pretoria and one at UKZN, using different rating scales, not necessarily standardized across the spectrum. And what we really endeavored to do with this research was to apply the methodology from what we had learned in the 4th year module of public health to really conduct a strong and robust, gold standard, simple, clear research study with a clear research question to try to get at the heart of the matter. And so, you know, in terms of our initial findings demographically, about 70% of students were female and 30% were male. This generally represented predominance of female respondents, but also reflected the actual demographics of medical schools as we are now transforming and transitioning to an awareness of training more female medical doctors, especially Black female medical doctors, and which I'm aware is also the agenda with regards to specialist training in the South African healthcare context. So partially skewed, but also partially representative. Important also in terms of representation, you'll see that we wanted to affirm and document the existence of LGBTQ and trans and gender non-conforming identities who often experience a lot more, especially social distresses and psychosocial stresses, which contribute to poor mental health in our communities. And so that was an important thing for us to acknowledge amongst our student population when we're looking at the demographics. About half of students were in their preclinical years and the other half were in their clinical years, that's split between years 1 to 3 being preclinical and 4 to 6 being clinical years. And another important aspect of the research that we were looking at the time was the effect of a specific mini semester, having been disrupted by a lot of student protests, necessary at the time to effect a lot of conscious change on our university campuses nationwide. We found that the implementation of that mini semester to make up and recover for lost time, teaching and tests and examinations was a major psychological stressor on a lot of students. And we suspected that it may have, contributed to the burden. And so we set that aside as a question as well. In terms of the main findings, we found that 1 in 5 students were diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and 1 in 4 with a depressive disorder. So these are clinical diagnoses by mental health care professionals. And in terms of rating scales, utilizing 2 gold standard rating scales, one was the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, and the other, the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Scale 7, we found that there was a huge symptom burden of depression and anxiety. So nearly half of students had significant anxiety that would put them on the scale of having a generalized anxiety disorder. And more than a third of students had significant depressive symptoms that might put them in the scale of having a major depressive disorder. And if you think about this burden of students just walking around in hospitals and clinics, how can you optimally learn like this? How can you absorb and retain information and flourish to the best of your abilities? So it is important to make these findings at the time and present them to the population at large, at our faculty, and to the scientific community. But 1 in 4 students were on psychotropic medication for these disorders. That was specifically defined as anxiolytic and antidepressant medications, just to narrow the question and to make it a more focused finding. And we actually did determine that there was a significant impact on mental health due to the mini semester. And that is an important finding, I think, especially at the time, because we had to weigh the benefits of bringing social conscious change to the way things are done in terms of decoloniality, in terms of transformation and redress of systems that are often very oppressive and continue to be to this day. We had to weigh that challenge of what it was required to sacrifice to achieve those changes versus some of the outcomes, perhaps, of those changes on our mental health. And to me personally, this was so important because, it was a impetus to faculties and universities at large to consider the fact of, rather than being reactive to issues, be proactive about issues, address them head on, head first, before, they bubble into the analogy I use is ruptured abscesses. I'm sure we can all relate to that analogy, but the like. That is a very, very important finding for me and was very close to my heart. So moving on from the actual study itself to disseminating the findings of the study, which is an important stage of research. We had a couple of presentations in and around the country. I've listed here 4 that were particularly important for me to expand upon, and the exposure that those research presentations gave to us was invaluable. We presented at the South African Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists and Allied Professions in 2019 in Johannesburg. And there you'll see myself, Prof. Petrus de Vries on the left, and Dr. Stefan van der Walt on the right. And then in the inlay, you'll see Dr. Eugene Davids, who wasn't present in person at the conference. That was an amazing conference because we were exposed to firstly, academic forum at a national level, which is major for us just to build our confidence, but also the exposure to many leading psychiatrists and mental health care professionals who had flown in from places like South Korea, Germany, the Philippines. There's an amazing melting pot to see the potential of what a career could bring one, especially when one was passionate about the career and the work that different kinds of people were doing. The next place we presented the work at was at the Department of Psychiatry in UCT at their annual research day, where interestingly enough, we shared the stage with registrars who were working on their MMeds, the consultants who had done other work in the intervening months. And quite truly flabbergastingly to myself and Stefan's surprise, walked away with the prize for the best oral presentation of the day. I was truly gobsmacked. In fact, I believe the HOD of psychiatry there at UCT was himself as gobsmacked as we were. He remarked how two medical students could come into a research day and walk away with the best oral presentation prize. But I really do believe that that was a testament to the robustness and the quality of the work and the dedication that we had put towards creating a really strong piece of research that would have a life, beyond its publication. Then the other two, the South African MRC Medical Research Council, together with UNISA, had a Decolonizing Mental Health Colloquium, which was an interesting place to present our work because we shared the stage with people presenting work in sort of lateral mental health fields, looking more at decoloniality, expressions of self, understanding of self and of mental health, more in the qualitative sense. And that exposure was also critically important to us. And then at the British High Commission more recently, where even though the target audience wasn't necessarily medical students, but a lot of the recommendations from our study found application in that population, especially coming off the back of burnout from COVID, working from home, and just the value that that was able to inject into that space was also remarkable for me to reflect upon. So really seeing the broad applicability of the work, its findings, and its recommendations. Further impact, if we do look at some of the recommendations from our actual paper, were evidenced in projects and initiatives that we continued thereafter. I've highlighted those that actually have been implemented, and the one that isn't highlighted, mental health surveillance, actually serves as an opportunity for the future, perhaps for myself or anyone else in the field of mental health to come back to, which is particularly mental health surveillance. So the main goal was to try and get institutions to expand their mental health services and access to services for students, to support students, and to also support mentorship within the fraternity as a huge sort of buffer factor towards severe and negative mental health outcomes. And then to incentivize things like positive behaviors, things like exercise, awareness, spirituality, food, diet, to dissolve the stigma around discussions of mental health. And I've loved seeing the progression in this in the last 1-2 years, especially with discussions about neurodivergence, and truly the wider acceptance of bipolar mood disorder and how it is present in so many of us and so many of our colleagues. And then the culture and values of medical training, which comes into the system and the ecosystem, which breeds and perpetuates medical students and sometimes perhaps toxic behaviors and behaviors of bullying, which are negative on mental health. And then acknowledging the role of resilience. So once you've experienced a lot of distress, discomfort, perhaps symptoms, how does one set themselves up to be successful thereafter in the future, in spite of? So with regards to service expansion, I was very proud of the fact that at the time when the Vice Chancellor, Prof. Pakeng, was looking at revising the UCT mental health policy and discussing this with the HOD of psychiatry, Prof. Dan Steyn, that we were invited to a meeting to really share and lend our voice from the findings of our study and as representatives of students towards ideas that could go towards this new mental health policy. And in fact, what came from that, which was amazing at the time to see, was an expansion of services, especially psychological services for students. If you think of some of the challenges that we had, it was access to psychological services. One, there were too few psychologists employed by the university to service us. And two, the times that we'd have to spend in clinical training in hospitals, offsite at satellite campuses, decentralized training made it very hard to actually access these psychologists. So they came up with an electronic booking system, they employed more psychologists, and they incorporated flexible times for students to make appointments. And that really did make a difference, amongst other things. Another one was a panel led by many mental health care professionals. This looked more at the qualitative side, getting the lived experience, the narrative, the stories of students, and really challenging the culture of medical training and trying to get a put a finger on the culture of medical training so that we could have recommendations and suggestions going forward on how we can change it. So we led this panel called Umgo, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, especially I'm sure the registrars who are going through the most right now in their reg training program. But really, it's a way of describing a significant distress in a sort of culturally contextual current way. I'm sure you've heard on many TikTok and Instagram stories, people explaining and exclaiming that ish diagoam dase. So we thought that that was really applicable to the experience of students, and we used that as the title, and it drew a lot of traction, and we had amazing engagements from that. More recently, an internship trying to address the mentorship aspect of our recommendations from the study, having joined in its second year of operation, the UKZN Junior Doctor and Intern Mentorship Program. I was really passionate about trying to bring a mentorship platform and space that could guide motivated junior doctors, because essentially we're the same population. We're medical students, and then the next year we're junior doctors, we're interns, we're comserves. And then the next year we're MOs. So we are the same people throughout our different roles, and we're affected by similar challenges. And so this was really targeted at motivated junior doctors who had no idea what they wanted to do, or who had an idea of what they wanted to do and just needed support on that path. We got together specialists, registrars, MOs in different fields, from emergency medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry, an academic mentor, a research academic mentor, as well as a mentor in, I think ONG, if I haven't mentioned that already, just to target some of the interests of our medical interns in Pietermaritzburg. And it was a very successful day. I'm so grateful to the mentors who took part: Dr. Amy Booth, Dr. Lindy Rekaba, Dr. Risa Lars, Dr. Sharon Thomas, and Dr. Knox Guea, who really made that such an engaging event. But furthermore than that, we also wanted to promote healthy behaviors and resilience in our junior doctors. So things like diet, exercise, nutrition, practices, habits. And we organized together with Dr. Stephanie Roche, who was doing internship at Stanger, and Dr. Gina Karam doing internship at Addington, and also at Dr. Amy Patterson, a junior doctors retreat, where we invited doctors from KZN at large, junior doctors, to come through and spend a weekend with us, affirming themselves, reflecting on their years, reflecting on COVID and working through COVID, and facilitated together with Dr. Anes Umbizvo, head of the Freedom Yoga Space, who herself is a clinical doctor who pivoted out of clinical medicine and into her passion, which is wellness. It really was a great meeting point for a lot of ideas and a lot of just health promotion for mental well-being. And so you can see there are many different arms of the impacts that the study eventually would have. In terms of media, very briefly, we were approached by Dr. Adil Khan, who worked on quite a prominent documentary called Behind the Front Line that came out a few years ago, looking at the toxic workplace frontline healthcare workers had to face. And we contributed our input with regards to findings from our study. But the focus of that documentary was much more broader on a range of issues, which were topical at the time. And similarly, more recently, the International Working Group for Health System Strengthening was working on a short film called Unmasked, looking at the burden of COVID specifically on mental health this past year. And our contributions to that from the study and our findings led towards, in larger part, the IWG putting forward a position statement, a policy statement towards COP26, Conference of the Parties 26, really advocating for greater vaccine equity access, especially in low middle income countries, countries in the global south, as a measure to really decrease the burden of COVID on these countries and any effect on mental health of these populations. So we move from research to the clinical sphere. Here we see the famed Harry Gwala Regional Hospital in Pietermaritzburg. And there I am in the corner, standing in one of the wards, really surprisingly, it seems empty. I don't know how that was the case, because this, as we most know, is a pumping hospital. In my internship, I had exposure to psychiatry through my clinical rotations. And I was very, very, very fortunate to spend my psychiatry rotation at Town Hill Hospital. I believe we were the first group of interns being reintroduced into Town Hill Hospital at the time. And I think that was the best rotation of my internship by far. I got to work with amazing consultants and registrars under an amazing leader. I got to work with Dr. Vedette Chubi, Dr. Lindiwe Kaba, under the amazing leadership of Dr. Janine Brooker at Town Hill. Got to do outreach to clinics, Brandtville, near Moy River, the Peter Maritzburg Assessment Center, and see just the different kinds of levels of care that were provided to patients beyond just the tertiary hospital level setting. I got to work in an outpatient department, I got to work in the wards, and quite critically at that time when we had the Delta variant, which was wreaking havoc, we had a lot of people who were out sick. We had a lot of people who were away, who were attending funerals for their loved ones who had passed. And it was quite a strained time, especially in that outpatients department clinic, but just the exposure to the patients, the caseloads, under the amazing supervision that I had constantly access to. I was able to develop a sense of independence in managing outpatient cases, which I felt was very important in my development in the field, but similarly being so well guided and supervised. That was a very special time, and I'm always so grateful for those 2 months of a rotation at Town Hill. Community service, which is where we find ourselves now, is an interesting story. So having been so inspired and really hunkering down on this path and this route, I felt that, okay, I want to go do my ComServe in psychiatry. I applied. My first option was in Lentegeur, which is the psychiatric hospital in Cape Town, where I'd done my final year and in medical school. And I got none of my options. I got none of my preferred ComServe options. And I found myself in a lovely, very sunlit clinic called Rosedale in Uitenhage. And so now I find myself living in Gqeberha, Eastern Cape, and serving my community service here has been the biggest blessing in disguise. In fact, I am happier that I have this outcome, because I found that through this, I was now able to be truly exposed to community psychiatry, psychiatry in the periphery, psychiatry where it matters, and where the impact of health promotion, prevention, management can go so far. Amongst the general primary healthcare patients I see working in the clinic, there is a contingent of mental health care users, some down referred from the tertiary hospital, others who are stable, and others who are acute, who require referral. And just that range and breadth of exposure has been amazing for my development this year. I've been able to also see some of the gaps in the healthcare system that are very important towards forming ideas of how we can address them in the future. We really struggled in the Nelson Mandela Bay district with access to super specialized services, for example, lack of access to neuropsychiatric services, a very limited access, in fact, to child and adolescent mental health services, and often full tertiary hospitals with no space, even district hospitals burdened by substances and psychosis due to substances. So getting a real feel of the climate in different healthcare settings, which is also why I'm happy that I'm here in the Eastern Cape, has just been a major, major plus, having experienced the Western Cape in my medical training, KwaZulu-Natal in my internship, and now the Eastern Cape in my community service. Epic fail. Oh, I think this is my favorite slide of all of them, because here I share a little bit about what importance there is to failure, how we need to become familiar actually with failure and be adaptive to failure. I think it can really set you on greater heights and set you on a greater path. I'll describe 2 examples of where I failed, one where I failed myself and one where someone else failed me, really failed to see potential in me, and how I responded to that and reacted to that and moved on. picked up my bootstraps. So the one was the first year. I remember chemistry was particularly difficult to understand, especially the concepts in the beginning of the year. We had these weekly assignments that we had to do. And I remember after submitting one, I came back with a mark, big fat red pen written on the top that said 0.5%. So get that, 0.5%. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. Rather just write a big F on the page and spare me, the humiliation. But what I saw from that was that I needed to act. I needed to do something to change the course that I was on. And I went back to the textbook and I went back to our tutors, often at that time, master's or PhD students within the subject. And I arranged extra lessons and classes to really grasp the concepts that I was failing to understand. And lo and behold, on our end of semester test, which was written quite funnily on my birthday that year, I came away with a markedly improved result. I managed to score 100% for that test in chemistry and really felt like I redeemed myself, but was also able to realize that that came through realizing something was wrong, making a change, dedicating, sacrificing, and working on it. Once you learn that lesson once, you can apply it countless n number of times again in your future. And the other was later on in medical school, doing a surgical discipline when I was in the surgical changing rooms, leaving at the end of the day, about to go home. And a professor came up to me, I think mistook that I was a female at first because I had an afro, and apparently only Black females have afros, and remarked that I was in the wrong changing room. When I turned around, I was quite shocked to see that I wasn't a female. But then I don't know where this came from, but he just decided to spew at me that, he would never hire someone who had hair like mine, who had an afro like mine. And I was quite shocked, to be, since I was probably 20, 21 years old at that time, to receive this from a highly regarded professor, head of surgical discipline, at the University of Cape Town. I was quite taken aback. This hair of mine that I've had for more than 5 years, this way it grows naturally, why does it cause so much in someone to feel so much discrimination? A stark example of racism, obviously one of many that we all experience often in life. But the way I decided to bounce back from that was to be like, you know what, Wakithi, I don't want to be hired by someone who thinks like this. I will make moves in my life that get me to places where I don't have to work in spaces like this. And little did I know, for example, testament to my psychiatry intern experience where I worked in the most supportive, amazing environment and was exposed to the actual truth of the importance of actual good leadership, conducive environments, conducive ecosystems. And so that taught me that, going forward, one must also actively seek spaces where they can flourish. Moving on from that to the future. So what comes beyond? What's happening next? There's a slide of the Rhodes Trust here, which is a charitable trust that sponsors postgraduate scholarships for the University of Oxford. And last year I was privileged and honored enough to be awarded a Rhodes Scholarship for postgraduate study at the University of Oxford for at least 2 years of study. And that was just a phenomenal application process, journey, and experience for me doing that during internship, during COVID, with all the challenges, and coming out on the end of that process successful towards a dream and a goal that I look forward to taking with both hands and running with in these identified fields of interest, which I've spoken about, which is mainly, research methodology and mental health. You'll see here that the future is quite bright. With the Rhodes Scholarship, of course, one is funded for 2 years of study, and this can be converted to a PhD or a DPhil, as they're called at the University of Oxford. And from left to right, top to bottom, you see my other fellow Rhodes Scholar elects from the Southern African region. There's Momikazi Lupindo, Ruan Spies, Dakona Hlajwako, Justin Winchester, myself, Gareth McHardy, Wiseman Zondi, Claire McCann, Kukubuhle Tsengwa, as well as Colin Kinghorn. And, we all operate in different fields, ranging from medicine to psychology, to law, to economics. and engineering. And it's really exciting to see what the future holds for this country in the hands of such brilliant and change agents who I personally believe outshine me in every respect. I've met all of them and they are the most wonderful people, the most brilliant minds, and just truly, truly inspiring. Um, so with regards to the Rhodes Scholarship, one has to apply for specific degrees. And I wanted to do the Masters in Global Health Science and Epidemiology and the Masters in Clinical and Therapeutic Neurosciences. They're both one-year courses, but you're advised to apply for both because just in case, you never know which one will take you. And some of them are really competitive. The Global Health Science course gets just shy of 400 applications every year for what is effectively 25 spaces. So lo and behold, to my surprise, to receive certificates of offer from both courses, both departments, was surreal. And with that, I mean, I'm so excited for the future. I'm so excited to take up these offers and to study, and privileged to have the opportunity to choose which one I did first. So I've chosen to go with Global Health Science and Epidemiology first, and I hope to follow that up the following year with Clinical and Therapeutic Neurosciences, which really, combines my passions and interests that I've developed over the years, which I've hopefully portrayed over the duration of this talk in research, really understanding the nitty-gritty of what makes a good research question, how you apply different models, methods to get a good answer. And then also within psychiatry and the clinical neurosciences, just really understanding the brain, what's going on in there, the basics, and building and building and building on top of that. I like to also share with the next slide. A lot of you may either be, applying for grants or funding, working on your MMeds yourselves as registrars. You may be students in medical school or in other disciplines. And a lot of you may know people who are in high school or still in university, brilliant, bright minds who should truly have access to all the opportunities that are available out there. And so I would encourage you to please look at and give a listen to this amazing podcast by Eusebius Mapaiza, 5 top tips for bursary and scholarship applicants, which really walks you through some of the things to consider seriously before embarking on such a process. And I just wish everyone could listen to this podcast. I love listening to it. I wish I had the opportunity to listen to it before I applied. And I just wanted to share that with everyone on a positive note towards paying it forward and towards sharing access and opportunities for truly the advancement of science and the flourishment of the field. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Wakithi. It's wonderful, wonderful stories that you've spoken about. So we've actually do have some time. So if colleagues want to, you can either raise your hands if you want to speak, or you can type in the chat and we can ask Wakithi some questions. Maybe I'll start, Wakithi, and just say that I really enjoyed your talk, and I was just wondering about what your thoughts are about what we should be doing as psychiatrists to attract medical students into the discipline of psychiatry. I think one of the things that we know in the past is that top bright medical students are often what's the word? Many disciplines go after them to try and get them to join their disciplines. Just from your experience, if you could maybe say what are 1 or 2 things that we are perhaps doing right, or what are some of the things that we should be doing as a discipline of psychiatry to attract bright young people to specialize in psychiatry?
To start on a tongue-in-cheek note, I think the lifestyle already does a lot to attract many people. But yeah, no, if I can really take your question more seriously, I think with that lifestyle, and I think there's an onus on passion, right? a passion for the field, a passion for mental health and for caring for mental health users and for caring for the population at large at risk of mental health issues. And I think those two go hand in hand. I think it's important to identify individuals who have that passion, even if they themselves may not recognize it. If I can speak from my own personal experience, I did not think I would be interested in psychiatry truly and honestly until the closing chapters of final year medicine. And even then, I was iffy and on the fence and entertained other options as well. So there's also a sort of they speak about with motivational interviewing, roll with resistance, right? If you see that there's a whole bunch of students, etc., passionate or bright, etc., present the option, show your passion in the field, share what ignites you about psychiatry, and hopefully that will catch on to someone else. But also know that people are considering many things, and things often take time to settle. A lot of people initially often consider and are drawn to professions by things like status, wealth, and a lot of those fields, etc., lose people along the way when they actually realize what it takes to do those professions and the sort of sacrifices that they make with their personal lives and their lifestyles and following those professions. So roll with resistance, but also share your passions as psychiatrists, as mental health care practitioners. I mean, again, my exposure to the Town Hall program in Pietermaritzburg, I got to see how everyone had their niche and they loved their niche through the academic talks that we had and the stimulating discussions we had. To see someone else share what they love and why they love it can inspire another person. So I think that is actually one of the strongest ways to do it. But also to recognize that the field of psychiatry and mental health is also on a trajectory. It's improving. It comes from a darker history. It comes from a darker past. And so to acknowledge that in the conversations as well, I think can open and level a playing field for true engagement with the field.
And I guess the time that you spent, did you spend, was it 2 months at Town Hill?
2 months.
So is really a testament to the fact that, many of us have been fighting for interns to spend more time in psychiatry. In the past, they've only had one quick month, which was never really enough. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the decolonizing journey that you've been through. Did you spend a bit of time with the Fees Must Fall movement? Was that your time at UCT, and what is that like for you as a medical student?
I think that was a very important time for me and for all of us in the fraternity. So initially there was in 2015 Roads Must Fall at the University of Cape Town, and then in 2016 Fees Must Fall, and the decolonial movements spawned from that onwards. I think they're very important discussions, and I think a lot of people engaged with it in different ways. We all have different strengths, right? And we all have different ways of availing ourselves to a cause or to a movement. I found my strength was in dialogue and in communication. And so I really worked with, firstly, myself, a lot of reflection. Where am I? What am I doing? Why is all of this happening? Why does it need to happen? Why shouldn't it happen? And then with my peers and colleagues to sort of transcend and gain new understanding from a current situation. At the time, I was very aware that we need to go somewhere from this. We can't just be at each other. We need to truly transcend. And that's, if I were to describe how I engaged with the movement at the time, I engaged primarily through dialogue and discussion. I loved the fact that our faculty was with us, specifically the Faculty of Health Sciences, were really together. There were tensions, there was a lot happening, but there was a unified goal. We were all aware that we needed to progress and advance. And so we were supported by the faculty, by and large, of course, because in any fractious moments, there are always many opposing views. But by and large, we were supported by the faculty and by our dean at the time, Professor Mayosi. We often held walks and demonstrations and sit-ins. He'd engage us, and it was truly noble, admirable, and I'm really privileged, actually, in retrospect, to have lived through that and been there through that. despite the challenges, despite the mini semester and having to cram, it was hard. It was hard to pass, but it was necessary. Some things are necessary difficulties in the growth and development of our nation and of our institutions.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess there's a lot of positives that came out, and obviously, there's also some difficult things that happened with Bongani Mayosi and others at UCT. Did you think that that was well kind of described afterwards in the media about some of the difficulties that he went through? And I think there was a time even people were kind of blaming the students and saying that it was the students' fault that he became depressed and the fate that happened to him afterwards.
Yeah, it's a very important question. And often one's mind wanders to that, or can wander to that, especially the media's mind, which often has an incentive to create a lot of speculation for their own interests as well, beyond really appreciating the sensitivities and the nuance of mental illness, which I'm sure a lot of us on this call today have a greater understanding of, really, when you think about risk factors, when you think about predisposing factors, when you think about exacerbating factors, when you think about genetic load. So I believe it was really a simplification of a much more complex issue, and a complex issue which continues to plague many people beyond him up until now and today, and will continue to affect a lot of people. And really, it's one of the major challenges of our time to address.
Yeah, so one of the things that Bongani Mayosi spoke about was that going to Oxford is like moving from playing in the local PSL to to playing in the international league, in the big league. So you are now going to be playing in the big league in Europe. And I'm just wondering, do you have a crystal ball to say, where do you think you'll be in 10 years' time, Wakithi? Will you be back in the country, perhaps leading some excellent research unit, doing work in mental health? Or do you think you are, I'm just wondering if you had a crystal ball, where do you think you'll be in about, say, 10 years' time?
Really interesting that you say that. Before I ever believed I could embark on such an endeavor to apply for such a scholarship, I truly didn't believe this was for me. I felt it was for hectically clever people who were just amazing and brilliant, and I didn't class myself in that category at all. It was, in fact, Professor Mayosi himself who sat me down and was like, "Wakithi, you are good enough. You can do this. You should do this. I believe in you." And, to juxtapose that with some of the other things I've heard from professors in my undergraduate training, it really shows you the power and the impact of that belief. And so taking that and going forward and realizing that this really is an amazing opportunity, unlike any other that I've had before, carries with it a weight as well, and I believe a responsibility. I truly believe that whatever knowledge is gained and accessed should be fed back to the environments that created it from where you're from. That's why I started my talk with my background coming from Durban and the importance of the values instilled with my family: love, openness, warmth, and support. Things must always come back. Similarly, I'm also open to opportunities that I'm currently not even aware of. Sitting here right now, I don't know what I'm going to find there. I don't know what it's going to be like at all. But there's a strong sense and a strong compass in me that guides me home always. And knowing that I'm, guided and interested, having been guided by an interest in psychiatry and research, and interested in following that up further, I know that that is my strongest pull at the moment.
Awesome. So I think, unfortunately, we have run out of time, Wakithi. There's a lot of chats congratulating you and saying, well done, very inspiring talk, and we really appreciate the time that you spent with us. We're looking forward to keeping tabs on your career. I'm sure we will be able to invite you again in a couple of years to hear how the first 2 masters went, and whether you've bit the research bug and converted one of them to a DPhil or not. Hopefully we'll be able to hear from you. And then just in closing, colleagues, Dihle just reminded us about our, I guess it's Crazy Socks for Docs, caring for our carers day to day. I think there are some crazy socks available at the medical school campus on the 4th floor. If there are still some, please go grab some, take photos, and it will be good to have those snapped up and posted on different social media sites. And we want to celebrate our doctors and other medical students and stuff, and to also say that the mental illness is also certainly affects them as well, and just like any other person in this country. Wakithi, thank you so much, my man. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of Gqeberha, out of Tinaga, and speaking to us this afternoon. Have a wonderful day for the colleagues. Thank you very much.